So we're still talking about property, plant, equipment, and we've chatted about allocating the cost, selling the asset at the end, using both straight line and accelerated methods. Well, what happens if something bad happens to my asset? What happens if there's a catastrophe? There's or an explosion or a fire, or maybe my product that I'm making using this equipment has just it's now obsolete. It nobody wants to buy it anymore, and so therefore the equipment was only used for a specific purpose. What do I do when that happens? Right? So when we have an event occur, we have something an event occurs that makes us question, right? An event occurs that potentially our assets, there maybe they've gone down in value faster than we were assuming they would go down over a period of time. Something happened, they're damaged, they're not useful anymore. So an event happens. When that event occurs, it's referred to as a triggering event. And what it's triggering is an evaluation of the asset. Right? I have to go through and evaluate whether or not this asset, whatever the book value is, has it gone down in value faster because of this triggering event than I was anticipating it was going to go down. And that's kind of a big deal. Now, if we think about all the what's happening down any place where there is any kind of a natural disaster or a weather disaster, there could be damage to assets that are on the books of companies. Those could be triggering events, and then I have to evaluate the asset to see whether or not maybe the value of it is much lower than what I currently have it on my books for. In other words, the asset is impaired. So there's two steps you've got to do. And we're not going to get into all of the fair value calculations for this, but we'll at least describe the two steps that you have to perform. The first step is we're going to take a look at we're going to look at this asset, whatever it is, and we're going to evaluate the gross cash flows, the total cash flows that will be generated from the asset and we're going to compare this, right? We're going to do a comparison. And this is the total cash flows over the remaining life of the asset. And we're going to compare these total cash flows to the book value. If the cash flows are greater, than the book value, do nothing. Okay? If the cash flows are less than the book value, step 2. You've got to go to step 2. And step 2, we're going to take these same cash flows and discount those cash flows. We're basically going to come up with a fair value of the asset. We may use an income model, such as discounted cash flows. Or we might use a market model. By examining comparable the value of comparable assets. Now, we're not going to, in this class, we're not going to get too in-depth with trying to figure these things out, but suffice it to say, in your review of financial information, and if there is an impairment, you at least want to understand how they determine the impairment. And when we look at the cash flows and we look at the fair value, one of the determining factors is we're always looking at what is the highest and best use for the asset. To determine whether or not it's impaired or not. Because I might have an asset, for example, I've got a series of assets all combined that is a miniature golf course in downtown Boston, and it's on a very large lot. It's on a half-acre lot in downtown Boston. And unsurprisingly, given the pandemic, not a lot of people are going out and playing miniature golf in downtown Boston. And so the company's losing money, right? And so the thing that triggered it might be this event, the pandemic. And so if I looked at the total cash flows that are coming off the golf course, the miniature golf course, the total cash flows may not be greater than the book value of the assets. And I have to go to step 2. So when I look at the income model or the market model, if I use the income model, I'm going to look at these same cash flows and discount them. But is a half-acre lot in downtown Boston, is that the highest and best use for that lot? And the answer to that is probably not. I probably make more money just using it for parking. And so while I may end up having these particular assets being used, and the gross cash flows may not cover the book value, when I look at highest and best use for determining if there is an impairment, I'm going to make sure that maybe it's not the same model. I might have to come up with a different model or a different use for that particular asset. And so you'll see these impairment charges in different kinds of financial statements, and I guarantee you in 2020 you're going to see a lot of impairment charges because of the trigger event that was the pandemic. So these impairments shouldn't be happening every year. It only happens when certain events occur. So I don't look at this as normal operations. This is something beyond normal operations.